The distant rumble of thunder echoed across the plains as Lillian Carter stood at the edge of Ogden, Wyoming Territory, 1878, watching a lone rider approach through the morning mist. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar silhouette of Nicholas Ryder, the most respected rancher in the county. She clutched her medical bag tighter, the weight of her secret feeling heavier than the instruments inside. The fever epidemic that had swept through town last month had finally abated, but it had left her with more than just exhaustion. It had revealed a truth she could no longer deny. Lillian had arrived in Ogden 2 years prior, a determined young doctor of 25, eager to establish herself in a place where women physicians were still viewed with suspicion. Nicholas had been one of the few to welcome her without judgment. At 32, he was known as fair-minded, if somewhat reserved, a quality Lillian had initially mistaken for disapproval. "Morning, Doc Carter," Nicholas called, tipping his worn Stetson as he dismounted from his chestnut mare. His voice, deep and steady, never failed to cause a flutter in her chest. "Beautiful day, despite that storm brewing." "Mr. Ryder," she replied with practiced professionalism, though she couldn't help but notice how the early light caught in his sandy brown hair. "What brings you to town so early? One of my hands took a nasty fall yesterday. Shoulder's not sitting right." Nicholas rolled his own shoulder in demonstration. "Thought I'd fetch you before the day gets away from us." Lillian nodded, grateful for the distraction from her troubled thoughts. "Let me gather a few more supplies." As they rode toward the Ryder ranch, Lillian found herself stealing glances at Nicholas. Over the past months, their professional relationship had slowly transformed into something deeper, lingering conversations after treatments, chance meetings on her supply runs, a shared meal when both happened to be at Harriet's diner at the same hour. Nothing had been declared, but Lillian felt the unspoken current between them. The Ryder Ranch sprawled across 1,000 acres of Wyoming's finest grazing land. Nicholas had built it from nearly nothing after returning from the war, a testament to his determination. The main house stood proudly against the backdrop of distant mountains, modest compared to some, but solid and welcoming. Inside, they found Diego, one of Nicholas's most trusted ranch hands, seated at the kitchen table, his face drawn with pain. "Doc Carter's here," Nicholas announced. "Best let her work her magic." Diego managed a smile through gritted teeth. "Gracias, doctora. I feel foolish troubling you for a fall." "Nonsense," Lillian replied, setting her bag on the table. "That's precisely what I'm here for." As Lillian examined Diego's dislocated shoulder, she felt Nicholas's gaze upon her. She worked with steady hands, explaining each step to both men. "On 3, she instructed Diego, positioning herself properly. 1, she moved swiftly, relocating the joint before reaching 2. Diego's surprise yelp turned to immediate relief. "You always do that," Nicholas remarked with admiration. "Count to 3 but move on 1. Lillian smiled as she began bandaging. "The anticipation is often worse than the procedure. It's kinder this way." After settling Diego with instructions for recovery, Nicholas walked Lillian to the porch. The storm clouds had moved closer, painting the sky in ominous shades of gray. "You should stay until it passes," Nicholas suggested, his eyes on the horizon. "I'd hate for you to get caught in that downpour." Lillian hesitated. Being alone with Nicholas would only make her inevitable confession harder, yet the thought of riding through a thunderstorm was equally unappealing. "I suppose that would be sensible," she agreed. Inside, Nicholas brewed coffee while Lillian stood by the window, watching the first heavy raindrops fall. The domesticity of the moment, the coffee pot bubbling, the crackle of the fire Nicholas had stoked made her chest ache with longing for what could never be. "Something's troubling you," Nicholas observed, placing a steaming cup before her. "Has been for weeks now." Lillian startled at his perception. "I've just been busy with the aftermath of the fever." "Lillian," he said softly, using her given name in a way that made her heart race. "I've known you long enough to tell when something's wrong." The rain intensified, drumming against the roof and windows, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Lillian took a deep breath and met his gaze. "I've been meaning to speak with you about something," she began. "About us." Nicholas's expression remained steady, though she noticed his knuckles whitening around his coffee cup. "I've come to care for you deeply," Lillian continued, her voice barely audible above the storm. "More than I should, perhaps, as your physician." "And I for you," Nicholas replied, the simple words carrying the weight of months of unspoken feelings. "That's why I must be honest with you." She set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "During the fever epidemic, I contracted it myself." Nicholas's brow furrowed with concern. "You never said I recovered quickly, but there were complications." Lillian forced herself to continue. "The fever was particularly virulent and it affected certain aspects of my health. The doctor from Cheyenne confirmed what I suspected." She swallowed hard. "I can't have children, Nicholas. The damage is permanent." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity, broken only by the persistent rainfall. "I understand if this changes things between us," she added hastily. "A man in your position needs heirs, and I, Lillian," Nicholas interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Look at me." She raised her eyes reluctantly, expecting disappointment or pity. Instead, she found only warmth. "You truly believe that would matter to me?" he asked. "It should," she insisted. "Your ranch, everything you've built." Nicholas moved to her side, taking her hands in his. "I built this ranch because I wanted a home, not a dynasty." "But children are a blessing, yes," he acknowledged, "but they're not the only blessing worth having in this life." Tears gathered in Lillian's eyes. "I couldn't bear it if you came to resent me." "Listen to me," Nicholas said, his voice dropping to a tender whisper as he drew her closer. "I love you for your brilliant mind, your compassionate heart, your unwavering courage. I love you for the way you face each day with purpose, for how you've changed this town, changed me simply by being exactly who you are." A single tear escaped, trailing down Lillian's cheek. Nicholas brushed it away with his thumb. "I can't give you children," she whispered brokenly. The cowboy's eyes softened as he leaned forward, his forehead touching hers. "You already give me everything," he whispered back. The storm raged outside, but within the walls of the ranch house, something fragile and beautiful took root. Nicholas's lips found hers in a gentle kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities neither had dared hope for. When they finally parted, Lillian felt lighter than she had in weeks. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Nicholas replied with a smile, "I believe I have a proper courtship to conduct if you'll allow it." The rain continued through the evening, giving them hours to talk, to share meals, and to begin imagining a future together. By the time the clouds parted and stars appeared in the night sky, Lillian knew her life had irrevocably changed. The following weeks unfolded like a dream. Nicholas courted her properly, as promised, riding into town with wildflowers picked from the prairie, escorting her to Sunday services, joining her for dinners at the hotel restaurant. They became the subject of gentle gossip, most of it approving. Dr. Carter and Mr. Ryder made a fine match. The townspeople agreed. She with her education and healing hands, he with his quiet strength and respected name. Yet not everyone viewed their courtship favorably. Jebediah Wallace, owner of the mercantile and self-appointed moral authority of Ogden, made his disapproval known through pointed comments whenever Lillian came to purchase supplies. A female doctor, he'd mutter just loudly enough to be heard. Unnatural business for a woman. Poor Ryder's being hoodwinked, mark my words. Lillian had grown accustomed to such prejudices, but they stung nonetheless. Nicholas, upon hearing of Wallace's comments, had to be dissuaded from confrontation. He's entitled to his backward opinions, Lillian insisted. I didn't come west expecting universal acceptance. You deserve respect, Nicholas countered, his jaw set in a hard line. And I have it from those who matter, she replied, squeezing his hand. Including you. Summer faded into autumn, and with the changing season came new challenges. A telegram arrived for Lillian one crisp October morning, bringing news that her father had fallen ill in Boston. The physician's daughter was needed at home. I must go, she told Nicholas that evening as they walked along the river that bordered his property. The water reflected the fiery hues of sunset, creating ribbons of gold and crimson on its surface. Nicholas nodded solemnly. How long will you be gone? A few weeks, perhaps longer. Lillian paused, voicing the fear that had gripped her since reading the telegram. My father's health has never been robust, if he requires extended care. You might not return, Nicholas finished for her, understanding immediately. The possibility hung between them, heavy with implication. Lillian had built a life in Ogden, established a practice, earned the community's trust and found love. But family obligations couldn't be ignored. I won't ask you to wait, she said softly. That wouldn't be fair. Nicholas stopped walking and turned to face her fully, the sunset painting his features in warm light. Lillian Carter, I've waited my entire life to find someone like you. A few more weeks or months won't change that. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band set with a small, perfect diamond. I'd planned to do this differently, perhaps with more romance than standing by a muddy riverbank. His smile was self-deprecating, yet his eyes held absolute certainty. But I want you to take this east with you as a promise of what awaits your return. Lillian's breath caught. Nicholas, are you asking you to be my wife? Yes, I believe I am. He took her hand. I love you, Lillian. Whatever life brings us, I want to face it together. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger, and she marveled at how right it felt, how perfectly it belonged there. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, I will marry you. Their kiss was filled with both joy and the bittersweet knowledge of impending separation. When they parted, Nicholas pressed his lips to her forehead. Go to your father, he said. Heal him if you can, and then come home to me. The journey east was long and fraught with delay. Autumn storms washed out railroad tracks, causing detours and extended stops in towns along the way. By the time Lillian reached Boston, nearly 2 weeks had passed since receiving the telegram. The family home on Beacon Hill stood as she remembered, imposing, elegant, a testament to her father's success as a surgeon. Yet stepping inside, she found it changed. Curtains were drawn against daylight, creating a perpetual twilight. The scent of medicine and illness hung in the air. Her mother, Lillian Carter, greeted her in the foyer with an embrace that conveyed both relief and exhaustion. He's been asking for you, Lillian said, leading Lillian upstairs. The doctors say. Her voice faltered. Tell me honestly, Mother, Lillian requested, her professional detachment warring with filial concern. They give him weeks, perhaps a month. Lillian's composure cracked briefly before she straightened her shoulders. But they don't know him like we do. Your father has defied predictions before. In the master bedroom, Dr. James Carter lay propped against pillows, his once robust frame now gaunt, his complexion ashen. Yet his eyes, Lillian's eyes, remained sharp and observant. There's my girl, he said, his voice weaker than she remembered but still carrying the authoritative tone that had guided her education. "Come, let me look at you." Lillian approached the bedside, taking her father's hand. "You should have sent for me sooner, and interrupt your important work." "Nonsense." He studied her face. "You're different. Wyoming agrees with you." Over the following days, Lillian divided her time between caring for her father and consulting with his physicians. The diagnosis, advanced stomach cancer, left little room for optimism, but Lillian refused to surrender hope entirely. In quiet moments between treatments, she told her father about Ogden, about her practice, and eventually about Nicholas. "He sounds like a fine man," James remarked, examining the engagement ring Lillian wore on a chain around her neck, keeping it close while avoiding the gossip it might generate in Boston society circles. "Tell me truthfully, daughter, does he understand the choice you've made in becoming a physician?" "Will he support your calling?" "He already has," Lillian assured him. "Nicholas values my work almost as much as I do myself." James nodded approvingly. "Then I shall have to live long enough to meet this paragon who has won my daughter's heart." But fate had other plans. James Carter's condition deteriorated rapidly as November yielded to December. Lillian maintained a vigil at his bedside, administering what comfort medicine could provide while watching her mentor slip away. On a snow-laden evening, with Boston wrapped in winter's first substantial blanket, James beckoned Lillian closer. "I have one last lesson for you," he whispered, his breath labored. "The hardest one I ever learned myself." Lillian leaned forward, straining to catch his fading words. "We doctors spend our lives fighting death," he said, "but there comes a time when wisdom lies in acceptance, not resistance." He squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "I am proud of you, Lillian, prouder than you can know. Live fully, love wholly, heal when you can, comfort when you cannot." Those were his final coherent words. Before dawn, James Carter passed peacefully, his wife and daughter at his side. The weeks that followed moved in a fog of funeral arrangements, condolence calls, and the settling of affairs. Eleanor, despite her grief, insisted that Lillian return west after the new year. "Your father would be furious if his passing derailed your career," she said firmly. "And this fiancé of yours deserves to know his fate." Lillian wrote to Nicholas regularly, pouring her heart onto pages that traveled thousands of miles across an increasingly snowbound country. His replies came less frequently. Winter mail service to Wyoming was notoriously unreliable, but each letter reaffirmed his devotion and his patience. By early February, with her father's estate settled and her mother adjusting to widowhood, Lillian prepared for the journey home. The night before her departure, Eleanor presented her with a carved wooden box. "Your father wanted you to have these," she explained, lifting the lid to reveal a set of surgical instruments, finely crafted and clearly valuable. "He commissioned them specially when you completed your studies. They were to be a wedding gift, but—" Lillian ran her fingers over the gleaming instruments. "They're beautiful. Take them to Wyoming," Eleanor said. "Use them to continue his legacy of healing." The return journey west proved even more challenging than the eastward trip had been. Winter storms had transformed the landscape, creating a frozen world of breathtaking beauty and deadly peril. Trains ran sporadically, when they ran at all. Lillian's anxiety grew with each delay. Her last letter from Nicholas had arrived weeks ago, before she'd left Boston. Had he received her messages about her father's death? Did he still await her return, or had he interpreted her prolonged absence as abandonment? When the train finally pulled into Ogden Station in late February, nearly 4 months after she'd departed, Lillian scanned the platform with desperate hope. But Nicholas wasn't there. The station master greeted her with surprise. Dr. Carter, folks weren't sure you'd be coming back. My father's illness kept me longer than expected, she explained, trying to mask her disappointment. Have you seen Mr. Ryder recently? The man's expression shifted subtly. Not for a couple weeks. There was trouble out at his ranch, rustlers, we heard. Several head of cattle stolen. Alarm raced through Lillian. Was anyone hurt? Can't say for certain. The station master scratched his beard. Town's been pretty isolated with all the snow. News travels slow. Determined to reach Nicholas, Lillian arranged for a wagon and driver, despite warnings about the condition of the roads. The journey to the Ryder Ranch, normally a 2-hour ride, stretched to nearly 5 as they navigated snowdrifts and icy patches. When the ranch house finally came into view, Lillian's heart sank. No smoke rose from the chimney. No lights shone from the windows. The place had an abandoned air that sent a chill through her, unrelated to the frigid temperature. "Wait here," she instructed the driver, climbing down from the wagon. The front door stood unlocked, unusual for any frontier dwelling. Inside, the house was cold but not deserted. Ashes in the fireplace suggested it had been lit within the past day. Dishes sat washed but not put away on the kitchen table. "Nicholas," Lillian called, moving from room to room with mounting concern. She found evidence of his presence everywhere: his books, his clothing, his pipe on the mantel, but no sign of the man himself. Nor did she find any of his ranch hands, who typically occupied the bunkhouse nearby during winter months. Returning to the main room, Lillian noticed something she'd overlooked. A letter addressed to her, propped against the clock on the mantel. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. "Lillian," it began in Nicholas's familiar handwriting, "if you're reading this, you've returned to find me gone. I pray you'll forgive the circumstances of our reunion." The letter explained that rustlers had indeed struck the ranch multiple times over the winter. After the third raid resulted in a wounded ranch hand, Nicholas and his men had determined to track the thieves to their hideout. "We leave tomorrow at first light," the letter continued. "Marshal Jenkins accompanies us, so you needn't fear we're embarking on vigilante justice. I expect to return within a week. If you arrive during my absence, please know that every moment away from you has been torment, lightened only by the knowledge that you were where you needed to be with your father." The letter was dated 5 days earlier. Lillian folded the page carefully, her mind racing. Nicholas should have returned by now, unless the pursuit had led farther than anticipated, or unless something had gone wrong. She spent that night alone in the ranch house, stoking the fire and preparing for whatever might come. The following morning brought no news but did deliver Diego, returning from town with supplies. His surprise at finding Lillian quickly gave way to relief. "Doctora, thank God you're here. We've been trying to send word to town." "What's happened? Where's Nicholas?" she demanded. Diego's expression turned grave. "There was a fight. The rustlers were holed up in an old mining camp north of here. They ambushed us." He removed his hat, revealing a bandaged forehead. "The boss took a bullet. We managed to get him to the Peterson homestead about 10 miles from here. Mrs. Peterson is looking after him, but..." Lillian was already gathering her medical bag. "Take me to him. Now." They rode through the afternoon, Lillian's mind filled with terrible possibilities. By the time they reached the Peterson farm, a modest homestead carved from the wilderness twilight was falling. Martha Peterson, a capable woman in her 50s who had raised 8 children on the frontier, met them at the door. "He's fevered," she reported without preamble. "Bullet went clean through his shoulder, but infection set in. I've done what I can with poultices and willow bark tea." Lillian nodded gratefully. "You've likely saved his life, Mrs. Peterson. May I see him?" Nicholas lay on a narrow bed in the Petersons' spare room, his skin flushed with fever, his breathing labored. When Lillian touched his forehead, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening with recognition. "Lillian," he whispered, "you're here, or am I dreaming again?" "I'm here," she confirmed, fighting to keep her voice steady as she began examining his wound. "And you're in considerable trouble, Nicholas Ryder. I leave for a few months and you get yourself shot." A weak smile tugged at his lips. "Knew that would bring you back." "Hush," she admonished gently. "Save your strength." The wound itself wasn't life-threatening. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone or major vessels. But the infection brewing beneath the hastily applied bandages could kill him just as surely as any bullet. Through the night, Lillian cleaned the wound thoroughly, applied fresh dressings, and administered the medicines she'd brought from town. She bathed Nicholas's fevered brow and held cool water to his parched lips. When delirium took him, she whispered reassurances, reminding him of their future together. Dawn found her exhausted but hopeful. Nicholas's fever had broken in the small hours and his breathing had eased. When he woke, his eyes were clear for the first time since her arrival. "You're really here," he murmured, reaching for her hand. "Where else would I be?" Lillian replied, interlacing their fingers. "Though I admit this isn't quite the reunion I imagined." Over the next 3 days, Nicholas's strength gradually returned. He told Lillian about the confrontation with the rustlers, how Marshal Jenkins had been wounded but survived, how 3 of the thieves had been captured while others escaped, how the stolen cattle had been recovered but at a steep price. "I've been a fool," he admitted on the 3rd evening, sitting up in bed while Lillian changed his bandages. "Risking everything for a few head of cattle." "You were protecting your livelihood," Lillian countered, "though I would prefer if future protection didn't involve bullet wounds." Nicholas caught her hand, his expression solemn. "When I was lying there, bleeding in the snow, all I could think was that I might die without seeing you again, without telling you once more how much I love you." Lillian's throat tightened with emotion. "I felt the same, watching my father slip away. Life is so fragile, so precious." "Then let's not waste another day of it," Nicholas said. "Marry me, Lillian, not someday, not when things are perfect. Now, as soon as I can stand without trembling." "You're still recovering," she protested weakly. "I'm well enough to know my own mind." His grip on her hand tightened. "Unless you've reconsidered." "Never," Lillian assured him. "My heart has been yours since that day in the storm." They were married 2 weeks later in Ogden's small church, with snow still blanketing the ground and Nicholas's arm in a sling. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by those who had weathered the winter in town and Nicholas's loyal ranch hands. Even Jebediah Wallace attended, offering a grudging congratulation that suggested he'd begun to reassess his opinion of female physicians, particularly those who saved respected ranchers from certain death. Spring came to Wyoming with its usual dramatic flair, sudden thaws, unexpected blizzards, and finally, gloriously, the greening of the plains. With it came renewal for the Ryder Ranch. New calves filled the pastures, Nicholas's shoulder healed completely, and the ranch house underwent transformation as Lillian gradually merged her possessions and sensibilities with his. Her medical practice continued, operating now from a dedicated room in the ranch house as well as her office in town. Nicholas built her shelves for her father's books and a special cabinet for the surgical instruments, a wedding gift that had finally found its purpose. Summer brought visitors. Lillian Carter journeyed west to see her daughter's new life, initially skeptical but ultimately won over by the beauty of Wyoming and her son-in-law's evident devotion. Nicholas's sister arrived from Denver with her husband and 3 boisterous children. filling the ranch with laughter and reminding Lillian of what she couldn't provide. She confessed this fear to Nicholas one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I still worry sometimes," she admitted, "that you'll regret not having this children of your own." Nicholas considered her words thoughtfully. "Do you know what I see when I look at those children?" He nodded toward his niece and nephews. "I see joy, yes, but I also see possibilities." "What do you mean?" "There are children who need homes, Lillian. Orphans from the war, from disease, from accidents." He turned to face her. "If someday we decide our family isn't complete, there are ways to grow it that don't require you to bear children yourself." The idea took root in Lillian's heart, a seed of possibility she hadn't fully considered. That autumn, as if fate had been listening to their conversation, opportunity arrived in the form of tragedy. A wagon train passing through Ogden was struck by scarlet fever. Despite Lillian's best efforts, several adults succumbed to the disease, leaving behind children with no remaining family. Among them were siblings Emma, age 8, and James, just 5, whose parents had been traveling west to start anew after losing their farm in Kansas. Both children survived the fever but were left entirely alone in the world. Lillian and Nicholas took them in temporarily, while arrangements were sought for their care. But temporary became permanent as the children settled into ranch life with surprising ease. Emma, serious and bookish like Lillian, developed a fascination with medicine. James, quieter but observant, shadowed Nicholas around the ranch, soaking up knowledge of horses and cattle. By Christmas, the decision had made itself. The Ryders formally adopted Emma and James, giving them a home, a future, and the love they so desperately needed. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and their newly expanded family gathered around the hearth, Nicholas pulled Lillian close. "Happy?" he asked softly. Lillian watched as Emma read to James from a new picture book, their faces illuminated by firelight. She thought of her journey from Boston to Wyoming, from doubt to certainty, from loneliness to this abundance of love. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. Nicholas pressed a kiss to her temple. "You see, you've given me everything, Lillian. Everything that matters." Outside, the Wyoming winter wrapped the ranch in pristine white, while inside, the warmth of family created not by blood but by choice, by commitment, by love filled every corner of the home they had built together.